Welcome to Brown Bag History for December 4th, 2024. And today we're talking about the community of Beaton. And as we begin, we acknowledge that the land around Revelstoke and on the Columbia River and its tributaries is this next homeland and traditional territory. We acknowledge the ties of the Secwepemc, the Okanagan Nation Alliance, and the Tanaha to this land. We acknowledge our use and habitation of this land sacred to these four nations. We respectfully honor their traditions and culture. So as we start to talk about Beaton, we do have to acknowledge that it was definitely part of the Sinixt territory, and some accounts say that it was sort of the motherland of the Sinixt people. There was a year-round village near Beaton called in Nikmaplex, and I'm sorry about the pronunciation, but it means head of the lake. And the location was possibly between Beaton and Comaplex. Eileen Delahanty Perks, who wrote the Geography of Memory, said that this large village was important for huckleberries and root digging. And in 1894, the Indigenous man named Jim, or Cultus Jim as he was referred to, was shot by a settler at Galena Bay in April of 1894. After he and his wife had been, Adeline had been chased out of that area by a settler named Evan Johnson. And so his land, you can actually see on this map, it refers to Evans. So in between Beaton or Thompson's Landing and Comaplex at that end of the lake. Just an aside, the exhibit that we just opened, Reclaimed Voices, we have a panel about Adeline, the wife of Jim, and it's just at the back there, and an interview as well with Adeline's great-granddaughter. So the Sinixt people, as well as they're using their sturgeon-nose canoes and dugout canoes for boat travel, they also had trails that were often intertribal trails, and there was definitely a trade route between what became Beaton and the site of Trout Lake. So when the town site was established in the early 1890s, it was referred to as Thompson's Landing, and it's Thompson with no P. J.W. Thompson, James Wilson Thompson, came to Revelstoke in 1889 as the first qualified school teacher. There'd been an older child teaching some of the younger children before that, but he was Revelstoke's first qualified school teacher. And they had their school classes in this building, which was the former Northwest Mounted Police Barracks at the top of Douglas Street Hill. And he was born in Ontario in 1851, came with his family to Chilliwack in 1875, where they had a ranch. And he was married to a woman named Annie Sluggett in 1879, and they had went on to have 8 children. He studied as a teacher in Ontario and taught at Chilliwack and Victoria before coming to Revelstoke to teach. So he taught here until 1891, and then he located the town site of Thompson's Landing with his partner, Malcolm Beaton. So the two men, Thompson and Beaton, were involved in the settlement of the area right from the very beginning. And so he moved down into that area. He and Beaton preempted a lot of land and started to develop it, started to build cabins, houses, and continued on with that. Thompson was apparently a bit of a character. There was a story told about him back probably in the teens or so, when he was getting quite elderly, and he had apparently had a drinking problem. But there was a story by a man named Fred Lade, who grew up with his older brothers in the community of Camborne, and he said they had a hard time keeping teachers there because he said they were a pretty rough crew of kids. And so every now and then they'd get Mr. Thompson to come and teach the classes. But they said, and Lade described him as a big, tall man who wore a goatee and a hammer-tail coat and was a great one for drink. He said he would go into a bar on his way to school. In the Lardeau, the bars stayed open all night. And sometimes his daughter would have to go looking for him to take him to the school. When he got there, he would take a long time calling the roll. Then he would set us a lesson and go off to sleep. He passed away in Victoria in 1934, but definitely is attributed with starting the community of Thompson's Landing, Beaton. The newspaper of July 11th, 1891, said that there's Malcolm Beaton, the other partner in that area. So the newspaper from July 11th, 1891 said the Lardeau is attracting prospectors and land hunters. Mr. J.W. Thompson on Wednesday returned from the Lardeau country and cannot say too much in favor of it. The trail into Trout Lake was completed by Mr. W.J. Haskins. More than a score of prospectors are already working around the foothills and mountains with encouraging results. And they first referred to it formally as Thompson's Landing in April of 1892. And the Kootenai Star newspaper of Revelstoke had a note saying that it said, from our own correspondent, Thompson's Landing, April 3rd, 1892, there are now 6 prospectors stopping at Thompson's cabin, waiting for the snow to disappear from the Lardeau Trail, when they will take to the mountains north of Trout Lake. Thompson is cutting lumber for a house at the landing. And then in June of that year, said J.W. Thompson and a large party left here for the Northeast Arm in a large rowboat on Monday. Thompson's Landing will probably become an important place, as it will most likely be the outlet for the mineral products of Fish Creek. Thompson sees a busy, bustling shipping port covering his waterside ranch. And then news from July 2nd, 1892, Thompson's Landing, June 29th. Over 40 prospectors have tented at Thompson's Landing during the past 10 days, giving the place the appearance of a canvas town or a camp meeting. Mr. Evan Johnson is busy with his pack train, carrying miners' supplies from Thompson's Landing to Trout Lake. And although he has worked incessantly during the last 10 days, the freight has accumulated on his hands. The services of a few more horses are required. And they're talking about more trails being built in the area and construction work on a trail to the Fish Creek, which is also known as Incomplex. In 1894, it mentioned that Mr. Beaton expects to load for Trout Lake about May 10th. Messrs. Beaton and Thompson are pushing work on their buildings. They are at present erecting an addition to the Prospectors Exchange Hotel. They intend to place about 300 acres of choice bottomland on the market in 5-acre blocks after the 1st of May. And Malcolm Beaton was also building a general store. The newspaper said, we have had a sort of famine at Thompson's Landing and Trout Lake recently. We have plenty of meat, flour, etc., but one of the principal staples, whiskey, is out entirely. I'm not sure if this is the bridge they're talking about in this article in 1895, but it mentioned that Messrs. Beaton and Thompson have constructed a new bridge over Thompson Creek, 90 feet long, and are constructing roads to connect their hotel with the Trout Lake Wagon Road and with the Deepwater Landing. And mentions Mrs. Needham. There was a member of the Needham family that had settled down there as well, and the Needhams were well known in Revelstoke. But Mrs. H.M. Needham is erecting a new house at Thompson's Landing to be used as a bakery and laundry. And Malcolm Beaton has brought out his pack train from their winter quarters to Thompson's. And then at this time, it also mentions Andrew Craig, who we believe arrived in the area in about 1895, and with a man named Hillman set up a stagecoach company. I recently did a talk on Andrew Craig. We acquired 2 big scrapbooks of photographs and information from that had been compiled by his Andrew Craig's son. And so that's where a lot of these photographs have come from. So if you want to see more about Craig specifically, that one talk is on our YouTube channel. But it mentions that in 1895, said Andrew Craig is expected with his horses on Wednesday next. 2 pack trains will run from Thompson's Landing to Trout Lake City during the summer, or until the wagon road is completed. After that, they will move the base of operations to Trout Lake City, and Thompson's will be the headquarters of the freight and ore teams. Business is reported lively for the season at Trout Lake City. So Beaton was definitely kind of the headquarters for the traffic in and out through the Lardeau. The first post office opened at Thompson's Landing on June 15th, 1895, with J.W. Thompson as the postmaster. In October 5th, 1898, there was an article in the Revelstoke Herald newspaper. It said, Thompson's Landing, a promising town site at the head of navigation. And it described how it was situated at the head of navigation on the northeast arm of Upper Arrow Lake, and is the point of transshipment of freight and baggage for Trout Lake City, Ferguson, and 10 Mile City. It is said that it is also important because it will be to a great extent be the center of supply for the Fish Creek district, which was just opening up to mining then. Thompson's Landing is possessed of a couple of completely equipped hotels. It is the headquarters for the stage line and a strong transportation company, and has a general store, post office, and blacksmith shop. Mail can be sent out and received daily, and a telephone service connects this place with the interior and outside points. And there's another photograph of Andrew Craig's stagecoach leaving Thompson's Landing for Camborne around 1902. There's a sign there that says Camborne, but it's, and at first I thought the picture was taken at Camborne, but it's actually advertising Camborne, saying only 5 miles from here lies wonderful mineral deposits of free gold, galena, copper, etc. Come up and see them. Another article in 1901 from the Kootenai Mail said J.W. Thompson, after whom this important point on the arm was named, was the pioneer store and hotel keeper in Thompson's Landing, but he retired from business some years ago and has a pretty home on the shore of the lake. Messrs. Craig and Hillman have splendidly equipped stables, which supply pack and saddle horses for miners, prospectors, and all sorts and conditions of men for 30 miles around. And it mentioned that he had 40 pack and saddle horses of good stamp, and Mr. Craig has just gone out to purchase another lot, especially with a view to packing out ore from some of the outlying camps. It said the firm also runs a stage 3 times weekly, each way between Thompson's Landing and Ferguson, and have 4 teams continuously on the road, handling freight from Thompson's Landing to Trout Lake and Ferguson. So there are 2 hotels there at that time. The Prospectors Exchange, a large building conducted by T.W. Graham, and the Pioneer, of which Isaac Bate is the landlord. The post office at that time was conducted by Andrew Craig, and A.G. Fraser had a well-stocked store, which he opened about a year ago, and Mr. Fraser is the agent for the telephone exchange. It said Thompson's Landing is a celebrated place for fruit at the season of the year, and travelers have a good time picking berries. Mr. Needham's garden is a favorite spot and one of the best and most prolific in the district in the way of small fruits. And also mentioned that there was a blacksmith and horseshoe business there as well. Though Malcolm Beaton, who I mentioned before, was born in Ontario in 1860, and in 1911 he married a widower with 4 children in Beaton. Came to the Lardeau in about the same, really when Thompson did it in 1891, and in August 1st, 1902, they officially changed the name of the post office from Thompson's Landing to Beaton because of the confusion with the initials TL for both Thompson's Landing and Trout Lake. So they, Beaton and Thompson agreed to the change, and they made an application to the Postmaster General to have the name changed. And they were still encouraging settlement in the area, and they offered 50 lots free of charge, with the stipulation that a house would have to be built within a limited period of time. So there was quite often news in the local newspapers about Beaton, just little social notes. Here's one from 1903. Mr. Moss, a first-class tonsorial agent from Virginia, has gone into business here and is doing very well. A tonsorial agent was a barber. So you would do like hair and facial hair. Said our merchant, who also acts as a private banker, has been up at Goldfields for some days, we presume cashing checks after payday. It is reported that the Arrowhead Sawmill Company have secured the right to cut all the timber on the east side of Fish Creek from Beaton to Camborne, comprising about 1,500 acres. And if you felt like it, you could go through the old newspapers and find all those kind of little tidbits of social news that was happening in the area. There's another photograph of the Andrew Craig's team on the Beaton Bridge. Looks like they were celebrating Dominion Day, July 1st, 1914. This is a photograph of Beaton around 1910, and it mentions there that it was taken by Mattie Gunterman. And when you're talking about Beaton, it's really Mattie, the Gunterman family is a really important family to mention. They had been living in Washington State in the 1890s, and they were related to Hattie Needham, Mrs. Needham, who was living in Beaton or Thompson's Landing at the time. And Hattie told them about the mining and lumber industry in that area, and sent photos and clippings from the newspaper from Trout Lake. Mattie was starting to learn photography and had acquired a 4x5 plate camera featuring a ground glass focusing, a bright anti-stigmatic lens with an iris diaphragm, and a multi-speed shutter. She learned how to use the camera and develop her plates and make contact prints. And she also was able to figure out how to get herself into the photographs using a tube with a rubber bulb at one end. And so she appears in a lot of her photographs. In the spring of 1898, Mattie, Will, and their young son Henry, who's about between 8 and 10 or so at the time, left Seattle along with their dog and a horse, and they walked north, finding work along the way. Will would work in sawmills, and Mattie would take in laundry or work as a cook in the camps. But they wanted to get to Thompson's Landing, so they kept walking north, and they finally arrived in June of 1898, having walked more than 600 miles. And she became known for her photographs in the area, and you can see they're extremely good quality. I couldn't show too many here because there's copyright on them. They were acquired by the Vancouver Public Library in, I think in the 70s. There was a fellow who from the Vancouver Public Library was looking for historic photographs from the interior, and somebody said, "Oh, go talk to Henry Gunterman. His mom used to take photos." So apparently, behind Henry Gunterman's house, there was an old shed, and they rooted through these boxes that were covered with mouse and rat droppings, and found all these glass plate negatives. And so they were acquired by that. And Henry said, "Go ahead and take them. I don't need them." So they were acquired by the Vancouver Public Library collection, and that's where they are now. They have published a book quite a few years ago about her photography, but really quite amazing. And as I say, they were residents of Beaton for at least 3 generations. The museum interviewed Henry's son Avery in 1977 and talks about the house. He said the original house was a log building. So they lived in a tent for a while after they arrived until they got it built. They bought a lot from J.W. Thompson and built a log building. But my grandfather mostly logged, and him and my grandmother used to go out in camps cooking. they sort of worked as a team together. And he said, my grandmother was very highly regarded in the district. There's a picture showing Henry Gunterman's house in the background there. Said, my grandmother was very highly regarded in the district for all the help she gave to people. If she'd been to one of the neighbors' houses and they hadn't been baking and all of a sudden company arrived, she used to watch and she'd say, well, she hasn't got any cake. So she'd bake a cake and run it around to the back door and hand it in. She was always baking for any kids that she knew. And my grandfather, William Gunterman, was a candy maker. Said he used to make big amounts of candy at Christmas and he supplied all the kids in town. He was the one that taught Horace Manning in Revelstoke how to make Broadway chocolates. That was his recipe. So I'm going to talk about some of the boats that operated in the area. This was the George F. Piper, the wood screw steamboat, built at Revelstoke in 1904, built for the Empire Lumber Company for use on the Arrow Lakes. And it was in service until 1921. We have a couple of good photographs of it. That one and this one, the load of horses that they're loading onto the boat here. And then there was a boat named the Yale, which was also a wood screw steamboat built at the cusp in 1903. And it was built by the Yale Columbia Lumber Company for use on the Arrow Lakes. And it was in use until 1928. But nice looking little boats. There was the couple of pictures of the dock at Beaton. And then one of the boats that was probably the most well known in the area was the Beaton, and it was built by Captain James Fitzsimmons at the cusp in 1928 to replace the Yale on the Arrowhead to Beaton run. It was 69 by 17 feet, so not a huge boat. It was owned by the Beaton Boat Company. The Beaton Boat Company later acquired the old SS Bonington, which was probably the biggest steamboat that had operated on the Arrow Lakes. It was almost like a floating palace, they described it as. But in 1931, it was taken out of service, and then they converted it to a barge for use by the Beaton Boat Company. And it apparently is lying in the water off the shore of Beaton at this point. But the Beaton was the boat that was sort of most well known in the area, as well as the Minto. So the Minto did the run on the main lake from Arrowhead down as far as West Robson near Castlegar. And then the Beaton concentrated mostly on the northeast arm between Beaton and Arrowhead. There's a picture showing the two together by Earl Dickey in the early 1950s. And and of course the boat was rebuilt at some point, so I'm not sure which was the earlier and which was the later version in all of these photographs. And as you can see there, it often operated with a barge. There's a picture showing the dock at Beaton, and they're ready to do some loading. Now this one you can see, look at the ice on the channel. There's the Beaton and the Minto at Arrowhead, and one of the captains of the Beaton for many years was Calder Souls, William Selby Souls. His son was Calder Souls. But when one of the jobs of Captain Souls on the Beaton was to take the boat from Beaton to Arrowhead every day in the winter when there was ice forming on the lake to keep the channel open. And if you've seen the exhibit that we have in the hallway downstairs of the two deer heads, those were discovered by Captain Souls one day when he was going across the channel to break the ice. He saw these two dead deer floating in the water that had been trying to swim across and didn't make it. So they managed to get the deer on board and had the heads mounted. And they were just donated to the museum a few years ago by Bill Souls, who was the grandson of Captain Selby Souls. So I've got quite a few other photographs of Beaton here. We're just going to go through and talk about those. And the yeah, so I was also going to mention about the Beaton. There was a note from 1950. It said the SS Beaton arrived here Wednesday and started its regular service to Beaton, unless breaking the ice is too difficult. The new Beaton boat was for use in ferry service between Beaton and Arrowhead, had been completely renovated and overhauled from stern to gunwale. It was streamlined and fitted with new diesel engines. So some of the later photographs of the Beaton that we were seeing there were after it had been rebuilt. Well, in 1911, there were about 65, and in 1942, there were about 60. So, you know, it sort of stayed kind of in that range most of the time. So I just have a lot of photographs of the area. It's the Beaton Hotel in June of 1947. There's a little bus there. The Beaton, there was original Beaton School was built in the early 1900s. And this is it in the 1940s. The young man in the front is Jack Lawton. Lawton families lived in that area for many, many years. And then a new school was built in December of 1948. We've got most of the photographs I'm going to be showing now came from the collection of a woman named Doris Workington, who was a school teacher in Beaton from 1951 and for a few years. And so these are pictures of her class. That's her at her desk there and some of the students. And Lois Miller, who some of you may remember as Lois Mazur, was her family lived at Beaton. And when Doris Workington was teaching there, she was staying with the Miller family. And so Lois was doing practice teaching at the Beaton School. To be about 1952. And they had a community hall that they'd built in 1921. There's some of the local school children outside of the hall in the 1950s. And this is the Baba family, the three of the children, Kenji, Ronnie, and Reiko. And their father was a lumberman, so he was working for one of the lumber companies there. And Diane Wheaton, some of you may know her as Diane O'Brien. Their family lived in Beaton, and apparently they were really good friends of the Miller family and Doris Workington, and she was very fond of Diane. So there's quite a few pictures of Diane. That's also Jimmy Miller, who's Lois's brother, and Mrs. Miller's tulip bed. I mentioned Bill Souls, who donated the deer heads that we have downstairs. This was his first grizzly hunt in May of 1954. So the skin weighed 125 pounds. It was 8 feet long and 5 feet wide. And that was about 4 miles from Camborne. And Beaton Hotel and the road to Trout Lake. It's Doris Workington and Gordon Souls. Gordon went on to become an author and publisher in Vancouver. He just died within the last couple of years. Pictures of some of the homes at Beaton. And most of these are from the Doris Workington albums. They were donated by her sister after she passed away. There's the Miller family home, and it mentioned that that's where Doris stayed when she was teaching there. Another picture of the Miller home. So there were, over the years, there were sawmills, shingle mills at Beaton. This is one called the Sartora Sawmill. This is from the 1950s. And truck hauling poles. Something cow there. Walter Shield, and Shield Road in Revelstoke is named after him. And a load of logs for the shingle mill. And this gigantic log, like one log on the truck. That's pretty massive. Yeah, that's a good question. pictures of the construction of the Beaton shingle mill. And again, after it's a bit more built up. So of course, so the area was slated as one of the areas that had to be cleared for during the construction of the Hugh Keenley side dam at Castlegar in the 1960s. The dam formally opened in 1969. So there was work going on from 1965 onward in clearing. The BC Hydro put out this little newsletter that they called the Columbia Newsletter, and they'd have 2 or 3 issues a year during the clearing work, and explaining sort of what they were doing in all of the different areas. And their newsletter of June 24th, 1965 said, areas to be cleared in 1966 were to be marked this year, including the north shore of the northeast arm of the Upper Arrow Lake, from a point approximately 1 mile west of Beaton to a point about 2 miles west of Galena Bay. And they had an appraiser of properties at Beaton and Arrowhead to begin in June. His name was Cameron McPherson, a veteran Vancouver land specialist who appraised property at Hauser for the land division for BC Hydro the previous year. And if you talk to anybody who was involved with negotiations with BC Hydro during that, most people will say that they didn't feel they got a fair deal. That's sort of the general perception from most of the people. They felt that the negotiation wasn't really a negotiation, that Hydro kind of knew what they were going to pay, and that was it. But the newsletter from December 13th, and this is the little photograph that appeared in their September 20th, 1966 newsletter, that hand clearing was necessary on the slope shore of the northeast arm, an area southwest of Beaton. And that's the only photograph I have of the actual clearing that was going on. And it said in December 1966, area to be cleared in 1967 was 27,000 acres, including on the northeast arm of the Upper Arrow Lake in the Beaton area. And then the newsletter of February 29th, 1968 said Beaton School may have new role at Trout Lake. The old Beaton School may become the hall for the Trout Lake Community Club. The newly incorporated club holds an annual fishing derby, raises money for numerous charities, and sponsors showers, parties, and other community entertainment. The society was incorporated, and BC Hydro agreed to let them have the school. The site was donated in what was called the Norwood subdivision at Trout Lake, and it was moved in the spring of 1968. And we were able to get these photographs from Madeline Nelson, whose husband Carl was involved with moving the building. And she lent us these photographs to copy. She took them while they were moving the building, and it's unbelievable. You know, there's the building kind of hanging off the side of the road there. This one, it's more off than on. So it was quite the feat getting it from Beaton to Trout Lake, but they made it, and then apparently it's still in use as the community hall in Trout Lake. The next newsletter in April 24th, 1968 said clearing is expected to be completed by July on 300 acres just north of Beaton. And the post office was formally closed on August 30th, 1969, although by then there was nobody living there. So right now in Beaton, there's maybe about 10 permanent residents and about 35 summer properties, and only a few foundations remain of the former community. And so segue from that into promoting this new book that we just published. It just arrived in the building on Monday, Stories Beneath the Surface. And it's a companion to our exhibit in here and our online exhibit that's on Digital Museums Canada. And it's mostly a photo essay. It's not tons of text, but lots of photographs of the area between here and the cusp. So those are available for sale now. We're going to have a little launch party here on this Friday afternoon from 1 to 5. We'll be here to sign books. We'll be showing a slideshow of the photographs in the books. So you're welcome to attend that this later this week on Friday. And then their next Brown Bag History is on Wednesday, December 18th. It'll be kind of just a little fun one about some of the history of music and entertainment in Revelstoke. So thank you for coming today.